Okay, thank you, everybody. You won't believe it, but for the last 2 days, we've been stressed beyond belief about whether there'll be enough food for you at lunch. Clearly, I think there was a ton of food out there, and you've all fed very well. And our challenge this afternoon is to make sure you don't fall asleep with all that food in your stomach. So as you're settling in, I just wanted to, you've seen the slides there, and we've got a great panel coming up. Today's moderator, the session's moderator, is Richard Harris. Richard, as I think most of you know, is a reporter for NPR. I listen to his stories, his reports very regularly on my commute, evening and afternoon, and I've watched a lot of his reports on the spill. In fact, I think he was maybe the first or one of the first to really start digging into the story about whether the initial reports, I think it was it 2,000 barrels a day or whatever it was a gross underestimate, and the flow coming out was much, much higher. That's an example of Richard's great reporting. I also wanted to, while people are settling, to sort of tell a little story here. He's also a really decent human being. And he kind of caught me interesting. About 9 years ago, I was at the Johannesburg Summit. It was the Rio Plus 10. And, you know, we're getting in Rio Plus 20 next year. And I happened to be in the press room doing some emailing back to my family or something. And Richard was doing a story about carbon offsets. And he happened to see me there at the computer. And he came over. He said, "Oh, can you help me with a story?" And, of course, the media come up. And you want to be on a story? You say, "Sure." So it ended up, this story was I going to pay $60 or $70 for my carbon offset for my flight? And of course, when the microphone's in front of you, you say, of course. You grab it, a card, and you pay for it. And so that was the end of the story. And about a week later, I got an email from the carbon offset company that said, Richard Harris just paid his carbon offset too, not paid for by Empire, paid out of his own pocket, and there was a note something to the effect of, thanks for being a good sport, Pete. So thank you, Richard. I've remembered that ever since, and then we have to do carbon offsets whenever we travel, and hopefully many of you did that when you came to the conference. So on that note, let me now turn the microphone over to Richard and another great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I walked over here, so I didn't have to pay a carbon offset to get here today. So that was a big relief. So anyway, welcome everybody. We'll keep this lively this afternoon since you've all had a little bit of food in your stomach, and I know that it's a good challenge to stay awake, but I've been chatting with these guys at lunch, and we are going to keep you awake, I promise. So let me make a couple of really quick introductions, and then we're going to just plunge into a conversation here that will take about an hour. So immediately to my right is David Yaskowitz, who is basically an economist, socioeconomics, is that right, at Texas A&M, and I will be throwing questions to him about the economic and social human impact of the spill. To his left is Pete Peterson, who is a professor at University of North Carolina, and his claim to fame is following the Exxon Valdez spill for these many years, and it's obviously really interesting to compare what happened in 1989 up in Prince William Sound to what happened in the Gulf of Mexico last year. So we will. I will turn to him for those questions. To his left is Ed Overton, who's an emeritus professor, although he's been working full-time, emeritus in quotes for sure, at Louisiana State University, studying the coastal environmental issues and so on. And last but not least is Wes Tunnell, who's also at Texas A&M, and he actually will bring us back to another huge spill in the Gulf of Mexico, Ixtoc 1 in 1979. So also very important lessons to learn from that as well. And I guess I want to throw my first question to Ed and say, okay, people aren't talking about oil anymore. Is it gone? What actually did happen to all that stuff that got spilled? 4.1 million barrels probably, plus another 800,000 that they managed to capture and bring ashore. Where'd it go? Do we still have to worry about it?
Next question.
You're not getting off that easy.
of course, we're not yet a year out from the spill. It's been 6 months since the oil stopped going into the Gulf, and so there's a lot of debate on just where the oil is. But it looks like maybe 2/3 of the oil was dispersed naturally and with chemicals at depth. Only maybe 1/3 of the oil got to the surface, last estimates I'm hearing. The oil is eminently biodegradable. It is certainly being degraded very rapidly. Oil that reached the shoreline, particularly in the marshy shoreline, is still on the shoreline. I've heard some numbers like something on the order of 10,000 miles of marshy coastline were in harm's way from this spill. Something like 600 receives oiling, 100 to 150 heavily oiled. And those areas that were heavily oiled certainly are still heavily oiled today. Along the northern Gulf Panhandle, we're seeing tar balls. We went from heavily oiling during the summer when the active oil was coming into the Gulf to mostly tar balls. There's oil that's been incorporated down into the sandy sediments. It's tar mats. These things are breaking off. So you clean up tar balls, and the next day you go back, you clean up more tar balls, which is pretty similar to most oil spills. It's going to take a while. Hopefully, as we go, the amount of tar balls will be less. How quickly and how much oil is on the shoreline is another issue. You can't get into the marshy shorelines to do much remediation, so we basically have to let Mother Nature handle it.
And 2/3 under the surface of the water, is it still oil or what is it now?
Well, remember, dispersed oil means that the droplets, in order to stay down at those depths, the droplet size needs to be something on the order of the diameter of a human hair or less, so 100 microns to 10 microns. So oil that's that small in diameter has an infinite rise time to the surface. Another way of saying that is it stays at depth. It disperses. Of course, it's got lots of surface area. It's being degraded by bacteria in the deep Gulf. Remember, the Gulf is an acclimated body to oil. 20 to 40 million gallons a year are estimated to seep into the Gulf. So you've got a highly acclimated body of water. And so it looks like as you get beyond the wellhead, something on the order of 10 to 20 kilometers, you lose the signal. So the current analytical capability doesn't seem to be able to track it much beyond 20 kilometers.
Is that because we didn't do a really good job of tracking it when it started to move away, or just because it's diluted to such an extent that you can't track it anyway?
Well, I think right now, of course, there's lots of studies that are going to be ongoing, but right now we're below the detection limits. In the detection limits for large quantities of water are in the low part per billion, part per trillion range. So we've lost the ability to detect it. Massive dilution, massive biodegradation. The oil that came ashore, there's no more oil floating offshore. There is stranded oil on the sandy beaches, and there's stranded oil on some heavily impacted areas, notably in the Louisiana Delta.